Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, uh, ambassadors, friends of ISAS. It gives me enormous pleasure to welcome you all yet once again to another of our ambassadors' lecture series, event of the lecture series. Today we have among us Ambassador Sutansky of Ukraine, who is going to talk to the situation in and around Ukraine and the implications for Asia. He's had a very long career in diplomacy, dating back to 1992, I think, 92. He served in Kiev, of course, and he's also served. His foreign postings have largely been in Asia, China, Japan. He was ambassador in Vietnam. He's been ambassador here since 2010. But in Kiev, he was also exposed to the UN and other European entities, etc., in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we are very pleased that he's with us to talk on a very, very contemporaneous subject. I also acknowledge the presence here and recognize that of a very senior son of Singapore, Ambassador Joe Consencio, who was the second Singaporean ambassador to the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics in the early 70s. Those of us who come from the profession of diplomacy had always known of him, had admired his works, and I still have the privilege of socially being able to socially interact with him. Thanks for being here, Joe. Also, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Juma Boy and others who have always been known as friends of ISAS and who have supported us through all our activities. We have today the subject is one that is being discussed on a day which is, in America at least, is known as Thanksgiving Day. Though it is initially an American tradition, the culture has spread to other countries. It's a day that we give thanks to all those we interact with, our friends, our families, our neighbors, our communities, our nations, and even foreigners, for the little acts of kindnesses and goodness they do to us, which make our lives pleasant. Today is one such day where we share joy. Sadly, this joyousness is not shared today in one country, and that is Ukraine. It is a country in a bit of strife. It was not always like that. Ambassador and I were talking downstairs. Ukraine is physically, even today, the largest European country, largest country located entirely in Europe. It was always known as the grain basket of the world, as a matter of fact. When we were children, we knew about the agricultural productions of Ukraine, and it was not necessarily confined to agriculture, manufacturing also, aerospace, other scientific products, etc. Ukraine has produced a very rich, we were talking about history, culture, Yaroslav the Great, I think, etc. And the wise, who was the wise? Yaroslav the wise. So there has been a golden part in Ukrainian history. I was also telling him that those of us who are bred in the Anglo-Saxon culture, education, knew of Ukraine right from our start when we were children in kindergartens because of a famous poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, which is called The Charge of the Light Brigade. And this had to do with the charge of the 600 who belonged to the 19th Light Infantry from Calcutta, as a matter of fact. Even today, and I didn't get to speak to him about it, the Maidan Revolution, for instance, the word Maidan in Indian means field. And fields, Maidans, not just in Kiev, but also in Calcutta or Dhaka, Maidans have always produced revolutions. The president is trying to restore calm in Ukraine, and it is our sincere belief that a time will come when the strife will be past them. As the Greeks used to say, this too shall pass. Peace will come, and once again, children in Ukraine would be able to tug at their mothers' dresses, point to the sky, the symbolic of peace, and say, Mama, the cranes are flying. So these words I give the floor to Ambassador Sultansky.
Thank you so much, Professor Childrey. I'm more than touched. It's introduction which even confused me because of some reasons. First of all, as far as I'm not a lecturer, don't expect from me some kind of lesson. This is just impossible because of the actual situation in my country, on one hand. On the other hand, in spite of the fact that I spent years in different countries of Asia, I do not pretend to be an expert in Asia, just simply because I've never worked with South Asia, firstly. Nevertheless, let me thank everybody, ladies and gentlemen, for the time you find it possible to come here to listen to my deliberations and probably share with me, with us, your ideas, your opinions. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here in the very well-known think tank, which the Institute of the South Asia Studies is. And, well, National University of Singapore, it brings additional spirit. So, I just cut a little bit of the passages from my speech to make the floor available for conversation. Well, implication of developments in Ukraine and around Ukraine in Asia and maybe wider. And hopefully some of you add some make them some contributions and put some questions. I'm ready to answer. Ukraine has never been spoken about that much as it has been recently. It could be regarded favorably if the prerequisite of such fame was other than falling a victim to Russian aggression after Ukrainians ousted corruptive regime during the Revolution of Dignity or Maidan uprising, as you put it. How comes it that dozens of millions of people in Russia almost overnight agreed with aggression as an affordable manner to deprive another nation from the sovereign right to choose its own way of life? Does this type of assertiveness reach far beyond Russia's neighboring countries? Are there any implications of the Russian world for relations between smaller and bigger nations around the globe, inclusive Asia? The Russian Federation, being a nuclear power and permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, undermined the key principles of international law and order. This is to begin with. I would like to reiterate, for those who trust Moscow-baked propaganda, this conversation might be unpleasant to you. There is a set of Kremlin fundamental lies which lay the basis of Goebbels-style brainwashing strategy and are designed to multiply zombies around the world. Just a few figures. In 2014, Russia spent 1.6 billion US dollar, rubles of course, for equal to 1.6 billion US dollar for state-run media, twice more than the United States, 752 million, provided for the support of the overseas broadcasting. Most of you know Euronews. Annual spending, 15 million euros. Russia Today, if somebody don't know, you will be impressed. 275 million euros. Needless to note that spending for web trolling is not accountable here. And trolling, frankly speaking, is, as for me, a new weapon of mass destruction. Nevertheless, I'd like to use this opportunity to convey to the distinguished audience a few messages which I believe you may find useful and rational. Just some of them. Firstly, concerning above-mentioned Russian propaganda cliché. The Russian Federation possesses inalienable right to teach and subordinate other nations, neighboring in particular, because it is big, and, I quote, "the truth is on our side," as Mr. Putin, President of Russian Federation, pronounced some days ago talking about the occupation of the Crimea. The Russian world ideology must be recognized globally as a higher level of human civilization compared to Anglo-Saxon dictatorship. Well, of course, simply because the Russian world is superior than anything humankind has ever invented before. And of course, America must be blamed for everything. Usage of democracy to justify US interference in other countries' internal affairs. Imposing of values that it does not adhere itself to. Arms race to exhaust others. Oil prices, purposeful decline from $120 per barrel, now close to 76, and since this day maybe even lower. Printing of banknotes to undermine positions of their competitors. 6 factories in the United States. Climate deterioration aimed at suppression of others' industrial development. Cyber control over all of us, arrogation to itself police powers across the globe, and so on and so forth. Exactly a year ago, thousands of students in Kyiv moved to the central square named Maidan to raise their voices in favor of the European future versus Eurasian Union, ruled by Moscow. Of course, natural question, who paid those students? It was instantly explained by the Kremlin entrusted talking heads. Of course, they were generously cashed by American embassy in Kyiv. Ukrainian winter is cold. Just believe me, it's really cold. In the night it can be as low as -25 Celsius. uncountably many people stand firm 3 months on Maidan, demanding then President Yanukovych to step down and resume pro-European wars. I did not put it in my paper, but I must say, I don't have many relatives, but those living in Ukraine, including me, I'm living in Ukraine by my heart, by my thoughts, etc. All of us supported Maidan. Financially, with foodstuff, with clothing. One of my relatives, he repaired cars for Automaidan, the form of protest, Automaidan. We did this voluntarily. We have not been approached by American embassy, American spies, Americans at all. We did it because it was our will to support Maidan against corruptive power. It sounds quite strange, ambassador of the country fighting against its own government. It is not like this. We supported Ukrainian people. We sworn in face of our people. We did not sworn president. We did not sworn government. Yanukovych and his proxies, being entirely corrupted and endlessly dependent upon Russian President Putin, lost every remains of legitimacy late February 2014. Those days, more than 100 unnamed heroes were cold-bloodedly shot dead by snipers, and Yanukovych escaped from the country with huge money stolen from national budget. Those events took place 21st February. Coincidentally, Little Green Man, the Russian regular army that invaded the Crimea Peninsula in the same time, in the end of March, were awarded medals for participation in the annexation of the Crimea from Ukraine. According to the dates on the flip side of the coin, Russian Federation had begun liberating Crimea 2 days before, then still legitimate Yanukovych rushed from Ukraine to Russian Rostov-na-Donu, city in the southern part of Russia. On the same side, there is an emblem of the Russian Federation's Ministry of, sorry to say, Defense, and below that this inscription: for the return of Crimea, and dates 12th of February 2014, 18th of March 2014. The dates on the medal also contradict Putin's statement that annexation of the Crimea was not even considered. Allow me some more quotations of the 2014 most influential, according to the Forbes, leader in the world, who is Mr. Putin, of course. The following quotations. February 28th. We are not going to send troops to Crimea. This is a complete nonsense. This will not happen and cannot happen. Full stop. It is, of course, not his direct words. He pronounced this in Russian. This is just interpretation. Later on, 14 March. Were the Russian soldiers? Those were Crimea's self-defense forces. Full stop. Next one dates back to 17th of April. Our military was behind the self-defense forces. And finally, 15th of November 2014. This is a fact, and we never concealed it. Our armed forces blocked Ukrainian armed forces in Crimea. from nowhere. Green Man developed into our armed forces, or Russian armed forces. Why I'm so particular about those developments? I'll answer. Trying to be very diplomatic. You please make your conclusions by yourself. MH17, which choked the entire world, was just only one more victim of the ferocious bear. Across Asia, nations were indifferent to the Ukrainian crisis until the MH17 tragedy took place. We must recognize the fact. It has changed since then. Let me share with you the assumption of Ukrainian security service on that tragedy, made after analyzing every component of the place, time, activities, and route of the Buk missile system mounted on tracked vehicles. For those who, well, Buk missile system is allegedly the weaponry from which the MH17 was shot down. There are two settlements in that part of Ukraine where the plane was shot down with the same names, Pervomaisk, some 40-50 kilometers one from another. The vehicle crossed the uncontrolled by Ukrainian side border and moved from Russian Federation to the one of them. Before the vehicle reached the point, it altered the route and approached another Pervomaisk, tens of kilometers from that one. This was because the team was not local and simply lost its way. So, what was the real target? According to the Ukrainian Security Service, it was a Russian air float plane returning from Turkey to Moscow. Its downing was intended to justify further incursion of the Russian army in Ukrainian soil. The team just took Malaysian plane for the Kremlin ordered one. Putin was really angry, I think so. More than 200 Russian citizens, miraculously but uselessly for him, were saved. They did not perform the role of victims to the Ukraine's junta. Instead, 298 innocent passengers and crew members of 12 nations lost their lives. 80 of them were children. Minutes after the plane crash, a pro-Russian terrorist placed his message in the social network, gladly reiterating that the bird fell on a waste heap. 15 minutes later, this message was removed. But none of us can forget the exultancy of the professional bandit, the allegedly former Russian Secret Service officer. I share the opinion of those who count this tragedy as a significant, if not crucial, momentum since which the adversary plans of criminals in the Kremlin ceased being implausible. The investigation is still underway, and final conclusion is expected in August 2015. I doubt a little that you are well aware of what's going on in Ukraine's eastern provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk presently. It is war. It is war unleashed by Moscow, waged by Moscow, funded and armed by Moscow. Up to 80% of the so-called rebels, or actually terrorist groups over there, are Russian soldiers and mercenaries from Russia. And some other countries, by the way. Kremlin insists that Russian tourists in camouflage or military men on vacation have every right to help Russian speaking in Ukraine's east. Thus, Russia sponsors terrorism, providing its proxies with every kind of conventional weaponry. Local population is being terrorized, infrastructure is being systematically destroyed. Those suspected of the absence of loyalty to the gangs in power in the occupied territories are detained and tortured. Presently, 26 Ukrainian citizens are kidnapped in Ukraine and illegally transported to the Russian Federation, where they are imprisoned. Most of them are regarded political prisoners. One of them, Nadia Savchenko, has been recently elected a member of the Ukrainian parliament. You may draw my attention to the point that the Kremlin's boss waves the banner of protection and defending Russian speakers, and less visibly but not less insistingly the Orthodox Church in what they named Novorossiya. Let me call this as a sheer hubble-bubble. Most of us, Ukrainians, are bilinguals. Speaking Russian, not worse than most of Russians. Well, how many of you present here can speak Mandarin, Thai, Vietnamese, Hindu, Malay, etc.? Not a few. Does it automatically mean you insist or you dream to be protected by a relevant state? Or you prefer being Singaporean or whoever you are and entrust your protection to your government, armed forces, security agencies, and so on? I think you have no hesitations about that. I'd like to reiterate, there is anything wrong with my wife living here together with me. She does not ask anyone to defend her because her Nazi husband, as far as my government is named by Moscow, very often junta and those in Kiev who seized power, etc. I am one of them. But I don't prohibit her to speak mother tongue, Russian. Sorry to remove a private life curtain in my life. I speak Ukrainian and she speaks Russian. It is this way since we live together and has never been a problem at all. Such is a reality in Ukraine. One of the fundamentals of the Russian world means that Moscow possesses a unique prerogative to protect not only its own citizens, but all Russian speakers simply because Moscow decided. It is better for them. I can't explain the logic of such stance. Here is no logic so far, to my mind, but assertiveness only. Ukraine as a sovereign nation has not been recognized by the most of Russian political class and brainwashed part of its population. That is why in 2005, Mr. Putin described the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. 9 years ago. Since even earlier days, he and his numerous special agencies had started weaving webs inside and around Ukraine. Decent Ukrainians impeded Kremlin's gleeful plans of an easy and fast subordination of their land, the goal which seemed to be so close. They were accused of fascism and forcible seizure of power in Kiev. Accusations drew punishments. which came from Russia to Ukraine in the form of annexation and invasion. In many languages, we just say, don't hit a man when he is down. We came from the situation when someone is unable to defend himself. Moscow did exactly the opposite. Weak and almost helpless Ukraine, in the end of February, was attacked by many times more powerful and uninterruptedly waging war big neighbor. Ukraine seemed to be an easy prey after years of kleptomaniacs' rule of the country. So-called brotherhood country did not miss a chance. And here I would like to quote Minister K. Shanmugam, early March remarks in the Singapore Parliament. This is a situation of a standoff now between a big country and a small country, or bigger country and smaller country. And third, Singapore has always emphasized that big or small, all countries must observe international law. Let me use this opportunity to mention one thing. Exactly 20 years ago, few countries, nuclear club members, including Russia, signed a memorandum in Budapest, which was supposed to guarantee Ukraine, after dismantling nuclear weapon, the sovereignty, integrity, and inviolability of its borders. You may see how this country observed its obligation. And not a surprise that there are many voices in Ukraine who favors resumption of nuclear status. They are not the majority, but their voice is really strong. Russia, being a nuclear power and a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, undermined the key principles of international law, neglected its international commitments, and set an undesirable precedent for relations with the smaller and weaker neighboring states. Why I use plural states? This is because Ukraine is only one of the Kremlin's prey. Moldova, Georgia were attacked earlier and, to my regret, remained unpunished. The so-called Russian world ideology that justified Moscow's offensive policy was a theoretical construct which evolved into brutal reality, posing a global threat. This September it was agreed with Russia in Minsk about immediate bilateral ceasefire and withdrawal of illegal armed groups, military equipment, as well as fighters and mercenaries from the territory of Ukraine. Instead, in breach of all agreements backed by Russia, terrorists continued shelling Ukrainian military and civilians. Only within the last 2 months, Ukrainian side was shelled almost 3,000 times. Dozens of military and civilians were killed and hundreds more wounded. Well, what is this territory which is now occupied by terrorists and a Russian army? Let alone Crimea. It is almost 16,000 square kilometers, with population before these events began of 3.8 million people. About 500,000 of them are temporary relocated persons staying in different parts of Ukraine. Just to mention, in the post-Soviet terrain, these territories of so-called frozen conflicts, I'll start from Transnistria. The territory is 4,000 square kilometers and 500,000 of population. Abkhazia, 8.6 thousand square kilometers, 240,000 people. Southern Ossetia, almost 4,000 square kilometers and 51.5 thousand people. So, the territory is, and number of the population is incomparable, as mentioned. But even now, as Professor righteously said, Ukraine remains the territorially the biggest European country, with population, if we exclude the population of Crimea from this, it is beyond 40 million people. And in Crimea, they also remain Ukrainian citizens, as far as world community and civilized world community does not recognize this annexation. It was confirmed in the United Nations, and we are thankful to Singapore in this respect, who contributed its vote also. Just a few words about Crimea. Well, the puppet administration and legislative body of the same status are in place over there. Economy moves directly to the inevitable collapse. Actually, middle and old generation were nostalgic of the benefits of the peninsula which they enjoyed in the Soviet era, when the Crimea was a heavily subsidized region. It was not a heaven of the earth at all. Because from the Soviet budget it received a lot. Sorry. Two dozens of Crimean Tatars. Actually, when Russia swelled the territory, reality turned out to be very, very different from those existed in the Soviet times. 2 dozens of Crimean Tatars, the local populations, went missing since Russia occupied the peninsula. The body of only one of them had been found. By the end of the Second World War, Crimean Tatars were deported from the peninsula. Then 1/3 of them died as a consequences of this Stalin's measure. Now the people is once again deadly endangered. One more example. 4,000 orphans in the Crimea are illegally adopted to Russian citizenship. Their rights are totally ignored. The question comes, what can be forecasted? I am not superstitiously gifted and prefer sharing with you what cannot be excluded. Russia can halt its self-destructive activity. Theoretically, it can. Unfortunately, it is not likely to do so in reality, because the natural question arises. What for all these atrocities have been committed? Maybe to make the job of the International Criminal Court in The Hague easier. There are many bold evidences of Russia's assertive activity globally. On one hand, it reminds us of the Cold War era behavior. On the other hand, it brings us an understanding that propaganda and assertiveness of the leadership of the country draw all the humankind to the breach of the next world war, if not stopped. Here and there, Russian delegations tour the world, approach governments with assistive explanations of how wrong the West and the US in particular are. Wider access to the Russian natural resources is offered. Special treatment for the investors is guaranteed. New business opportunities in various spheres are advertised. These promises are tuned nicely, but look at the belt around the world, biggest and in terms of territory state. From Japan to Arctic, Russia troubles its neighbors. Is it able to collaborate on equal terms with any other country? To say the truth, I have doubts. Irrespective of size and might, either it is India and China, or Sri Lanka and Singapore, everywhere the rhetoric is the same. The West is doomed, and the future belongs to Asia. Here is a key. That's why Russia decided to resort to the Asia pivot, not because of some other reasons. If I disappointed someone that I did not speak much about the implication to Asia, just look at my country and project behavior of bigger nation to smaller one. The implication would be terrible. The only way to escape of this disastrous behavior is to respect law, to respect international norms. Nobody invented anything else. The alternative is the next global war. Definitely, we in Ukraine, we shall overcome. We don't have much manure. We must overcome. And we invite you, all of you, friends and partners, to stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you.